And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball news and discussion. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Podcast on the Brink is a joint production of the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. For complete coverage of IU basketball, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com.
Hoosier fans, it's Indiana basketball time. IU Basketball Mini-Series tickets are now available in 6-game or 3-game ticket packages, as well as individual games. This is your chance to check out the Hoosiers inside beautiful Simon Scott Assembly Hall. For more information, call or text 812-855-4006 or visit iuhoosiers.com. Go IU.
On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, we are absolutely jam-packed, loaded with IU basketball talk. Probably going to set some kind of record for the longest episode of Podcast on the Brink ever. We're going to start with an audio mailbag. Alex Bozich is here. We're going to answer the questions that you submitted. Many of you submitted questions to our voicemail line. Others of you submitted questions inside the Hall Premium Forum. A lot of really smart questions, some fun topics to get to, so Alex and I are going to talk about those. And then at the end of the episode, on the back end, we're going to give you basically a preview of a new show called The Matchup that will be running in the Podcast on the Brink feed this year. Our interns, Seth and Ben Ladner, a couple of seniors at IU, really, really smart, astute basketball fans. As we go through the season, they're going to be previewing Indiana's opponents and kind of giving you some matchup analysis. And in this first episode of The Matchup, that's what we're calling it, they're going to give their season preview, go through the schedule, talk about some games that really stand out to them, and talk about the team in general. So a great discussion. That's why this episode is extra long, but definitely worthwhile, definitely worth hanging around to listen to. And then in the future, as I said, those episodes will be standalone here in the Podcast on the Brink feed so that you have easy access to them and can get some additional insight on your Hoosiers. So we're going to get to all that here coming up in just a minute. Before we do, I want to take at least a minute or two to talk about this week's sponsor, Home Field. And, you know, Home Field, as we've been telling you, they're technically a new sponsor to the show, but the team behind Home Field is one that we're really familiar with, that you are too. You know, if you've been listening to Podcast on the Brink, if you listen to us over at the Assembly Call as well, because Home Field kind of spawned from Hoosier Proud. This past August, the team over at Hoosier Proud, who's been a longtime sponsor, both of Podcast on the Brink and the Assembly Call, they took all of their college designs and they launched Home Field. And at their website, homefieldapparel.com, you will find the comfiest and the most unique officially licensed apparel that you can find anywhere. Home Field was started by an IU grad, and all of Home Field's premium collegiate apparel is designed and printed out of Indianapolis. So when you support them, you are supporting an Indiana business, an Indiana company. And if I might offer a suggestion for what you might want to look at first, because this is one of my favorite shirts that they have created, and I own it myself, check out the IU Champions tee. It features the 5 championship years and a vintage IU basketball design. I own it. I love it. This is a shirt that I'll be wearing as we go throughout the season. Obviously, we all hope that they have to redesign this shirt soon because there's a new championship season to add on there. But for right now, they've got the 5 championship seasons, and it's definitely a shirt that you should check out. And here's the best part. Our friends at Home Field have a special deal for Podcast on the Brink listeners. You can use the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at checkout for 15% off your first order. The website, homefieldapparel.com. Again, promo code BRINK, 15% off at homefieldapparel.com. Home Field, wear one for the team. Okay, let's get this started. First, it's me and Alex answering your questions, and then stick around after that for the first episode of The Matchup with Seth and Ben Ladner. All right, Alex, we're less than 2 weeks away from the season starting. People have questions. They're expecting us to have some answers. You ready to do a little mailbag action?
Yes, and I'm also ready to have things to talk about that involve actual basketball games and not FBI trials or other things of that nature. So 2 weeks from now, when we're recording, we'll be recapping, I believe, the Chicago State game. So looking forward to that also.
Yes, absolutely. It cannot come soon enough. But in the meantime, there are still interesting fun, important topics to talk about, and so that's what we're going to do here on this episode. So let's get right to it. Several questions were submitted via voicemail. We'll get to those first, and then we have a few other ones that we want to get to too. But let's go right now with this first question from Alan.
Hey guys, love the show. It's Alan from Hickory, North Carolina. I have a simple question. Who's going to log the most minutes at the 5 this year, and who's going to log the second most? Thanks. Looking forward to your answers. Bye.
Alex, what's your initial thought here on who will log the most minutes at the 5?
I think my first answer would be Juwan Morgan, and my second answer would be Evan Fitzner. I'm going to say Morgan first because I think there's a pretty decent chance that Indiana is going to have a lot of smaller lineups featuring him at the 5 when it makes sense, obviously, depending on the opponent. And then I think the other person I would look at would be Evan Fitzner, based on his ability to stretch the floor, shoot from the perimeter, and all the good things that we've heard about him in the preseason. I wouldn't be surprised if Deron Davis carves out a role for himself at some point in the season, but I would go with Morgan and Fitzner as my two that I'd be looking at that position, at least to start the season.
Yeah, I think you're right. Certainly, Indiana functioned the best last year when Juwan was at the 5. And, in an ideal world, he wouldn't have to play there as much this year because we saw the wear and tear that caused on him as the season went along. And I don't think you want to put him through that all season long. But, Indiana's best, most versatile lineups probably will have him there. So I certainly think we'll see it. Having Evan, around is certainly going to help. Would your answer change at all if we entered this season with Deron fully healthy? Do you think?
Probably, yeah. I'd probably have him more, maybe ahead of Fitzner. I don't know. It could be a wash between those two because I just think they're so different. Depending on the matchup, you're going to see, one of those two guys, I think, pretty frequently. But to go back to your point on Juwan and the minutes, even if he does spend a good amount of time at the 5, I think the difference between this season and last year, it was, last year there was really no one to back him up or anyone to give him a break. I think this year the roster is filled out a lot more, and you're going to have a lot more opportunities to get guys in off the bench to maybe take some of that load off of him. So maybe instead of playing 35, 36 minutes. Some nights he's playing 28, 29. I think ideally that's what you'd want to do, just to have him as fresh as possible for the stretch run of the season. Because what you don't want to do, and I think last year, Indiana didn't make the postseason, but I think if they would have, made the NIT or, the tournament, just watching how they played, particularly down the stretch, how much he played, Juwan Morgan and Robert Johnson, I think those guys would have probably been pretty close to running out of gas just based on how much they were used. And it was, no fault of the coaching staff. It was just the situation, the cards they were dealt. You ride your best players and try to win games. But, there wasn't really any opportunity to go to the bench without a steep drop-off. I think that's why, Clifton Moore was on the bench all year, right? And they never felt comfortable putting him in. And so I think that kind of speaks to how they felt about the bench and their depth last year.
Yep. All right, here is the next question from Tom.
Hey, Jerod and Alex. This is Tom Jordan in the Premium Forum TJ21. Just a question. I don't know if this is even a question as much as it's just my concern. Not real concerned over the defense this year. I think with the length we have and with the depth, that'll sort itself out. I guess my concern is, number one, free throw shooting, because we got to shoot better than we did last year. Number two, who is the absolute leader of the team? Will Devonte step, Rob take the spot? Is Al that guy? What guard is going to truly be the leader? Just wanted your viewpoint on that, your opinions, what you guys think. Thanks a lot for doing this. Bye-bye.
Obviously, Tom's audio broke up there a little bit, and he actually had a third one that was in there, but it wasn't audible, so I edited it out, which was about who will consistently be kind of the third scorer behind Juwan and Romeo. So his concerns, and we'll address all of them, free throw shooting, who will consistently be the scorer behind Juwan and Romeo, and then he kind of phrased it as who will be the absolute leader of the team. But was really, it sounded like talking more about point guard. Between Devonte Green, Robert Finney, and Al Durham, because I think we know who the absolute leaders of the team are. It's Juwan Morgan and Zach McRoberts. They're the captains. They're the most experienced guys. But in terms of who will be kind of leading the offense, it seemed like is more what he was asking. So, Alex, let's hit these three concerns, starting with free throw shooting. I kind of think we both agree the free throw shooting will get better. First off, just because it can't get a whole lot worse. And just because you had a lot of guys, like a Juwan Morgan who shot so much worse than kind of their, the historical percentages that he set through his first couple of years. And he's just, he's got a good looking shooting stroke. You have to think it's going to get a little bit better. So, I think the free throw shooting will get better. Is that a concern for you going into the season?
Not as much, because Romeo, I think, is going to help with that a great deal because, one, he's a pretty good free throw shooter. I think something like 80% over his high school career, although he did have some games down the stretch of his high school career where he missed more than usual. But he's also going to be getting to the line, I feel like, as much as anybody, maybe besides Juwan on this team, just because, he's going to get in the lane and get to the basket a lot. And if he doesn't finish, a lot of times he's going to get fouled. And so if you have a guy who's taken a majority of your free throws, it's that good of a shooter. I mean, obviously that's going to inch the team percentage up. With Juwan and the free throw shooting, I don't really have a great explanation as to what happened last year. I think sometimes you can get in, and this goes with any sport. I mean, you can get in a rut to where, you are a slump, whatever you want to call it, where you can't get out of it, and it kind of just snowballs, manifests over a long period of time. And I think that's what we saw to an extent with Juwan last year. Some of it may have been fatigue later in the season, as we talked about in the first question, just the wear and tear and just all the minutes that he played. Free throw shooting a lot of times, particularly down the stretch, is about conditioning and just how much you have left in the tank, and it's also a mental thing. So we'll see. But I don't necessarily think it's going to be a great free throw shooting team, but I don't think it's going to be nearly as bad as last year. I don't think it's going to be something that we're really going to be talking about, hopefully, that often over the course of the season. That's just kind of my perception when you look at what Romeo is going to bring to the table.
Yeah, and I will also add, Duran really struggled shooting free throws last year. He was 50%. He was a much better free throw shooter as a freshman. So, again, I would expect him to be better, assuming he's out there playing. And the other reason I think Indiana will be better is that Freddie McSwain was third on the team in free throw attempts last year. He took 70, shot 57.1%. Not a guy obviously known as a shooter. And so I think you distribute those free throw attempts more, to guys like Romeo, maybe to a Justin Smith, that kind of thing. You're going to have an improvement right there because free throw shooting just wasn't one of the strengths that Freddie brought to the table. So for a lot of reasons, I think that should be better this year.
Yeah, I was gonna actually say the same thing. Justin Smith's a guy that needs to get fouled more, right? His free throw rate last year was 32.9%. With his athleticism and his ability to kind of explode past people, he should be more in that 40 to 45% range for free throw rate, in my opinion. And we'll see how that goes. But, he wasn't a great free throw shooter last year either, but at 67%, he was better than the team average. So, if he can improve and also get to the line more, I think that'll give the overall numbers a boost as well.
Okay, so how about who will be the consistent scorer behind Juwan and Romeo? How concerned are you about finding that third guy?
I don't necessarily think it's going to be one guy. And, if I had to pinpoint a guy, I would probably go with Justin Smith. But I think it's going to be different guys on different nights. I think Juwan and Romeo are going to be pretty consistent with their output. But Devonte Green, I think, is a guy that can go out on a given night and get you 15, 18, 20 points. Justin Smith, I feel like, is a guy that's going to be able to do the same thing. Last year, there weren't a lot of those guys on the roster. I think Romeo kind of takes the pressure off of the other complementary players. If Justin Smith is, your third or fourth leading scorer in a game and he can go get you 12 or 14, I think you've got a pretty balanced roster. But, if I had to pinpoint the guys who are going to be in that role most consistently, I would go with Devonte Green and Justin Smith, with the caveat that, I feel like there's a lot of guys who can come in and probably score double figures. Jerome Hunter's a guy that I think is going to have his moments. Deron Davis is a guy, if he's healthy, that could have his moment. Evan Fitzner, you could see coming in and splashing 3 or 4 threes in a game. I just think this is kind of goes along with the theme that we've talked about all offseason, is the depth on this roster is so much better than last season, at least on paper. Now we'll see how it manifests itself when the games actually start to happen.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at Evan Fitzner's game log from last year at St. Mary's. He's a guy that would have 0 points, 3 points, 5 points, 14, 0 points, 4 points, 7 points, 17. So 20 points. So he's a guy who probably isn't going to be a real consistent scorer, but in the right matchups and the right game flow, when he's getting those open looks and able to knock them down, he'll probably be able to get you 15, 16, 17 points, a couple of nights when you really need it. So I think, he's definitely a guy to include in there too. And I agree with you. I think it'll probably be Justin most nights, and he would be the guy you would bet on just because his role seems the most secure of the other guys, but it'll still be, I think it'll be a lot of guys kind of stepping up and being that third scorer.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of having 2 of the 10 best players, maybe 2 of the 6 or 7 best players in the league on your team. You're not as dependent on guys who maybe aren't as capable of doing it consistently. So, I wouldn't. We should see by the end of the season how many different guys on this roster have a double figure scoring game. I would guess it's going to be at least
8.
Wow, 7 or 8, 8 or 9 maybe.
Yeah, could be
8. It could be, which would be pretty impressive. It'd be interesting to see how many had that last year. To go back and look.
Yeah, and then the third concern from Tom, which is point guard. And I guess the way to look at this is: are you concerned about the ability of one of those 3 guys, Devonte, Rob, or Al, to actually seize the position and kind of be the guy? Or are you okay with it kind of being a committee and maybe, one game Devonte being hot and you ride the hot hand, and another game you maybe need the steadier hand of a Rob Finney? Like how much does that concern? We know the position itself is concerning to all of us because we need good play from the position, but how concerned are you about one guy kind of taking it and seizing it?
Yeah, it's hard to answer because we haven't seen, Devonte talked a lot about at Media Day about how his mental approach to the game has changed, but this is kind of every year, right? Before the season, every coach likes the offseason that they had. Every player thinks they had a great offseason. Every player's worked on X, Y, and Z, and there's a renewed sense of optimism with the new season, but we just haven't seen it with Devonte. I'm not saying that he's not capable of it. I'm not saying that he's not going to just grab the reins and run with it. But until that happens, and I think we'll know pretty early, as I kind of wrote today in the power rankings I did for the site, he's going to play Marcus Howard of Marquette and Trey Jones of Duke the first month of the season. So we'll, I think, get a pretty clear picture of kind of where he stacks up. But I just can't forecast that he's going to be reliable at all times. But I would say that Indiana fans shouldn't feel, discouraged if he can't do it every game, because I think Rob Finney is a guy who over the course of the season is going to get a lot better and more comfortable in the role. He's not going to be a guy, I don't think, from day one that's going to come in and, be able to play 25, 30 minutes a game. But I think over the course of the season, if there's a game where Devonte just doesn't have it, he's going to be an adequate backup. Al Durham, I think his role, I don't necessarily think you want to have him as your primary ball handler for long periods of time. I think he's better probably playing off the ball a little bit. If his shooting from the perimeter can get a little bit better, I just don't necessarily see him as a lead point guard on this team. Yeah. But I think Devonte and Rob are going to be capable of at least giving this team average to slightly above average point guard play. The question is, can they do more than that? Because I think that kind of is going to tell the story of Indiana's ceiling this year. If they're just okay, then that's not likely to lead this season on the most favorable path.
Hey, before we get to the next question, let's talk about something else that you might be concerned about here as we get ready to head into this highly anticipated Indiana season, and that's buying tickets to the games that you want to see. The Chicago State game is coming up. The first game that Romeo Langford will be playing. There's a lot of other big games on the home slate, like the Marquette game, the Louisville game, tons and tons of good Big Ten matchups, and there's nothing quite like being there in person. And that's why you need to think about tickets. But getting tickets online can be complicated. With hundreds of sites, varying levels of reliability, it's not always easy to know who to trust. But that's why SeatGeek is the way to go. SeatGeek pulls millions of tickets into one place so you can easily find the seats you want for a price that you're willing to pay. As I mentioned, there's nothing quite like being there in person, and SeatGeek is the one who will get you closer to the action for great value. They actually designed the ticket buying experience to be easier than ever. They search multiple ticket sites, they grade every ticket based on value, and that helps you immediately identify the best seats that fit your budget. And, very importantly, every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets on SeatGeek with confidence. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone. I use it for sports tickets, for concert tickets, really any type of live event that I want to go see. SeatGeek is the first place that I go to see if they have tickets because I know I will get the best value there. And best of all for you, because you're a Podcast on the Brink listener, you get $20 off your first purchase. So just download the SeatGeek app, enter the promo code BRINK today, B-R-I-N-K. That's promo code BRINK, and you will get $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. SeatGeek, life's an event. We have the tickets. And now, back to our audio mailbag. Okay, let's go on to question number 3. And this is about Devonte. So here's the question.
Hey guys, Trotty B from the Premium Forum here. My question's about Devonte Green. Do you guys see him as a better role as a starting point guard or coming off the bench? Initially, I thought he made sense as a starter, but thinking about it, I feel like Rob Finney might fit better because coming off the bench would allow Devonte to kind of initiate the offense a little bit more, whereas if Rob's in the starting lineup, he can kind of blend in and facilitate with Juwan and Romeo on the floor. Thanks, guys.
Alex, what do you think?
I think the best role for Devonte Green and his confidence is as the starter. That's my opinion. I think if he's not starting, then he's not living up to what the coaching staff expects out of him based on everything that has been said in the preseason. And what I mean by that is basically he's the junior, right? He's kind of been through this twice. Robert Finney is, while he is a very good prospect, someone I think is going to be a really good 4-year player in Bloomington. I don't necessarily think he's more well equipped as a freshman to come in and run this team. He's not Yogi Ferrell, and that's no knock on Rob Finney. Like I said, I think he's going to be a really good player, but I think there's more of a learning curve for him than a guy like Yogi, and even Yogi had his share of struggles coming in. So I think for Devonte, this is his opportunity to be the starting point guard. And if he doesn't take it, I don't necessarily see that as a positive for this team.
Yeah, I agree. I understand the premise of the question because you look at a guy like Devonte who's a little bit inconsistent but can be kind of a spark plug offensively, and you never quite know what you're going to get from him, at least through the first 2 years. I guess maybe on a perfect roster, if you had like Yogi Ferrell, Devonte kind of profiles as a good guy to bring off the bench. But I think you're right. Within the context of this team, this roster, what's been said this offseason, all of that stuff, I think it's a really bad sign if he's not the starter. So I think ideally that's what happens, and he takes the role and, kind of runs with it, and Robert Finney is there to, to provide support and kind of help balance things out when Devonte does have an off night. But I agree with you. I think that's what this team really needs if it's going to reach its ceiling.
100%. I absolutely agree with all that.
Okay, so this next question, this is from Swish in the Premium Forum, and he did submit it via voicemail, but the audio was kind of choppy, so I didn't want to use it. I'm just going to read it. He said, to this point, it appears that Archie has done everything right in Bloomington except winning. What level of success does this team need to achieve in order for Archie and the staff to feel it has been a successful season? Not the fans or the media, but just Archie and the staff. So, Alex, this kind of requires you to step into the minds of Archie and his coaching staff. What do you think it will take for them to feel like this has been a successful season?
Yeah, I wouldn't get too caught up in the wins and losses to this point. It's been one season, so he's 16 or 15. He didn't necessarily have, the thing I liked about kind of how he approached last season was he never said, these aren't my players. He always embraced, like, these are the guys that we inherited, but they're also our players now. So we have to make them fit what we want to do. And they never got away from that all season, despite the struggles, the ups and downs. So, I wouldn't get too caught up. I look at what he's done to this point. I think the defensive things he's done, changing the culture there, is significant. To have a top 5 defense in the Big Ten last year was, to me, major progress in year one. But in terms, I think, of this season and how the coaching staff will view success, I think it starts with contending for a Big Ten title, right? Jerod, we've talked about this a lot over the years. Like, for Indiana to get back to where Indiana wants to be as a program, I think it starts with the Big Ten. They won 2 Big Ten titles under Tom Crean, but then in the other years they were just so wildly inconsistent with the results. And so if you want to get back to a team that's, contending perennially nationally, with a chance to go on a deep tournament run, it starts with what you do in the conference. And so I would say a realistic goal this year, something that, should be aimed for, is contending for a Big Ten title. Not saying they have to win it, but, to be in the top 3 or 4, then I think you're setting yourself up pretty well for the postseason. And we all know the postseason is a total, matchup based situation. If you go into the tournament and you get, somebody gets knocked out early, you have a chance all of a sudden the bracket opens up, like it did for Archie at Dayton, right? He went to the Elite 8 based on, a couple of good wins, and the bracket opened up a little bit. A lot of that is luck of the draw, but I think it all starts with the conference, right? There's 20 games now this year in the Big Ten season. Indiana's got to be one of those top 3 or 4 teams, in my mind, to consider this season a success.
I agree. I mean, I think that's what we've talked about. I'm sure, the coaches probably look at it a similar way. Compete for a Big Ten title, break the 2-year drought from getting into the NCAA tournament, and then you kind of take your chances from there. But I think those are the 2 things that get back to competing for the Big Ten, the first of, then doing that consistently on an annual basis, and get back to the NCAA tournament. And then the other thing probably to think about from the coaching staff perspective is, you talk about the season, there are things that are going to be going on outside of just the games, and part of that is recruiting. So I think the other thing that probably for the staff looking at, especially given all the time that they've invested into Trace Jackson Davis and Keon Brooks, is they've probably got to get at least one of those guys to feel like things are kind of still going in the direction that they want. If they get 2 of them, it's a total grand slam. You're really feeling good about next year. But I think that's something else that needs to happen, either during the season, I guess, or after, whenever those guys decide, is, you got to lock one of those guys in so that it still feels like that future trajectory is continuing to, kind of be upward like it has been ever since Archie took over.
For sure. I agree with you. They at least have to get one of those guys. Not saying they have to get both, but just kind of based on what's available now and how far down the line they are with both, I think they at minimum need one of them.
Yep. All right, here is our final question that was submitted via voicemail, and then we got a few after this one. Here is the last one.
Hi, this is Quang from the Premium Forum. Do you think we'll get any info from the secret scrimmage, and what kind of info we might get? Thank you. You guys do a great job. Bye.
Alex, do you have your disguise, like the glasses and the little mustache, ready to try and sneak into the secret scrimmage and get us some intel?
I was actually counting on Quang to maybe sneak in and sit up in the balcony and give us a recap on the forum. But joking aside, usually how this works is somebody associated with one of the programs will leak it out to one of the national guys. And you'll probably see it on a Twitter feed at some point over the weekend, later on Sunday maybe. So-and-so beat so-and-so, and secret scrimmage. There's going to be a ton of these coming up, so that's kind of how the information will be disseminated. But you're not going to see an official box score. You're not going to see any media there or fans.
There will be no post-scrimmage show, unfortunately, as much as we'd love to do one.
No, I mean, you could actually do a post-scrimmage show, and you could just
make it up.
Just speculate on what happened, right? I mean, in a thriller at Bankers Life Fieldhouse, Indiana beat Loyola Chicago 70-68. No stats were available, but we've used our imagination. But no, Quang, unfortunately, with the NCAA rules on how these things work, there's no official way to get information. Although I'd be shocked if there aren't some details leaked via some national folks at some point. But Indiana cannot divulge the details. But I will say that I think it's great that they're playing Loyola Chicago in this type of matchup at Bankers Life Fieldhouse rather than, just beating an in-state opponent in an exhibition game by 40. I think you're going to get a lot more out of that than they would by playing a second exhibition game.
Well, I agree, especially since, no offense meant, well, I mean, I really shouldn't say that because offense is meant here, but Chicago State is kind of another exhibition game. I mean, they're going to be really bad. Yeah. So
it might be worse than Southern Indiana. I mean, I think there's a legitimate case for that. So, yeah. And the other, I mean, Southern Indiana, there's a lot of teams that are playing. I saw Ken Pomeroy had a tweet where there's a ton of D1 teams playing D2 teams to open their season. Some of those games might be better than Indiana, Chicago State. I mean, Chicago State is like bad. I mean, I think they're 340s in Ken Pom, and there could be a case that they could be the worst team in Division I. So not going to learn a whole lot out of that one.
No. Okay, so let's get to a few of these other questions that were submitted in the forum. C-Dub has a question, and it goes along a little bit with some things that we've already talked about. But, right now, without having seen the team play at all, what would your close game under 4 minutes lineup be, Alex?
Wow.
I know.
Under 4 minutes. Let's see.
And some of this is going to be a little bit matchup dependent, but, just kind of generally speaking, what's the five guys that you would feel the most comfortable having out there in a close game?
Devonte, Romeo, McRoberts, Smith, and Morgan.
Yeah.
I think that's mine.
Yeah, I'm in the same place. And, again, depending on matchups, you could have Fitzner out there, depending, it says close game, depending on what the score is, things could change a little bit, but that to me is, it's the safest to kind of project forward. And we'll see, when the games actually start, if we still feel the same way, but that's how I would go, having not seen them play yet.
I've gone back and forth on the whole should Zach McRoberts start question.
I have too.
This offseason. And I think I've finally, the last couple of weeks, settled into I think he should start because of the way he played last season. And someone else needs to prove. And if they have in preseason and practice, that's great. If he's not starting by the season, by the time the first game rolls around, if he's not starting, I think there's a pretty good reason for that. Either he didn't perform up to expectations, which I doubt, or somebody outplayed him, which would be encouraging. But until someone, shows something significant enough to say, well, I deserve to start over Zach McRoberts, I think he should start. I've come around on that. Originally, I thought it was going to be Fitzner in there with Smith and Morgan, but now I've kind of come around on the Morgan, McRoberts, Smith as the starting front court, at least to start the season.
I agree. I think it's nice to be able to have a guy like Fitzner who can come in and give you that spark off the bench, hitting a few threes. Think about how many times Colin Hartman came off the bench and would kind of give Indiana a spark with a quick three-pointer or a couple three-pointers. Evan Fitzner could kind of be that guy who can do that. And with Zach, you're right. I think he's earned it. He was one of the most consistent players on the team last year. And even more than that, it's not like a thing where it's just kind of by default. I think, especially on this roster, with the guys that he'll have playing around him now, I think it's going to be a little bit easier to mask some of his weaknesses and really accentuate his strengths, because we know how good of a player he is defensively. And having him be able to take on a big load defensively is going to help, guys like Romeo as he adjusts to college basketball, and even, maybe help take some of the pressure off of Juwan. But also offensively, Zach is really going to be able to pick his spots, find openings, and be a jump shooter and kind of an opportunistic, loose ball offensive rebounder type guy. And yeah, I guess that was kind of his role last year, but it was harder for him to kind of get those opportunities because there just wasn't that much around him. Now there's so many other guys to pay attention to, and he's a 39.4% three-point shooter, so he's just got to be ready to take those shots. I think this roster fits him better. So I think it's not just kind of like a by default thing. Like, I think he actually fits well in that lineup based on what he brings to the table. Yeah,
it's crazy that we're even having this conversation just based on the fact that early last season he he wasn't even playing. I mean, remember that early on in the year,
Yeah.
he was like not even getting off the bench. And so
Archie has said he regrets that he should have played him earlier.
Right. But I think, you know, there could be games where it makes more sense down the stretch if you need shooting that Demezy Anderson or Jerome Hunter or somebody gets in there. But, you know, I think we're talking about locking guys down the last 4 or 5 minutes of the game. Is there anyone better, at least on going into the season on this roster than Zach McRoberts? I would argue that there probably isn't.
Yeah, and you know, he's going to help you get loose balls. He's going to make winning plays. So yeah, I agree. Okay, let's go with this question from TPM Noah. Are you at all worried about the Ostrom name drop in a sidebar at the FBI trial, and or how many links to Indiana would there have to be for you to be worried? So just to kind of recap, this was in an article at the Kansas City Star. It actually came out on October 20th, but it kind of took a few days, I guess, for people to take notice of it. I didn't, see it until yesterday. And correct me if I'm wrong, but basically these were sidebar conversations. They weren't actually admitted. The jury didn't hear them. The gallery who was there watching, they didn't hear them. These were kind of private conversations with the judge. And they basically cited someone else who was relaying a message or a conversation that he had with Tom Ostrom in regard to the recruitment of Silvio DeSousa, who ended up at Kansas. And now, they're actually holding him out because of all the questions around his eligibility. And kind of the basic point was that Ostrom had said something to the effect of, we're willing to, to do what it takes, or super willing, or whatever the phrasing was, to get involved with the recruitment. And again, it was hearsay because it wasn't actually a text from Ostrom. It was someone relaying that message. And, Indiana was never actually involved in the recruitment of DeSousa. So, one of those things, it's kind of difficult to really judge it just because it's kind of flimsy and tough to know what exactly is there. But fill in any gaps there on my explanation. But how worried does that make you? And, what other links would there have to be for you to be really worried?
Wow. A lot to unpack there. First, I will say I'm not worried because I follow recruiting as I like to think as not as close as anybody on the beat, but I follow it pretty closely. And I'm aware of guys who have taken visits or Indiana's been involved with, and I do not recall any significant or really any involvement at all with Silvio DeSousa. What we have here is a situation where somebody, as you mentioned, has relayed what somebody said. And I don't necessarily think the wording of what was said really tells us anything. Now, could it be interpreted one way? I guess. But you can also say that, we want to do whatever it takes to recruit somebody means, hey, we want to get involved and we want to be as active as possible. What do we need to do to recruit this kid? Now, looked at in the context of a kid who has obviously admitted that or whatever it's come out that he was paid. It looks bad, but I don't necessarily think from an Indiana perspective there's anything to worry about. It's a pretty big leap to assume that anything wrong has gone on here. The kid never visited Indiana that I'm aware of. They were never seriously involved with the kid, and so I just have a hard time. And I'm admit that I can be as cynical as anybody at times, but this to me is just not anything that is going to move the needle for me or raise a red flag. And I know it was talked about a lot yesterday and or on Tuesday, I think by some Indianapolis media, but I didn't look at it as anything to be too concerned about. Just like a couple weeks ago when it was revealed that Tom Crean hugged some guy. That, I mean, if we're going on conversations that are like, this isn't a text message, just isn't an actual comment from somebody. It's somebody relaying something that they think somebody said or say somebody said. I'm not going to put any stock in a hug or a third-hand conversation until we have something more concrete, which I seriously doubt exists. I don't really see it as a reason to get too worked up.
Yeah, this to me is the kind of thing, like, it makes you raise your eyebrow, because you never want to be involved in anything like this. You'd rather be 100 miles away from it. So it's always a little bit disconcerting when you see the name, but you actually read this and there's not that much to go on here in this specific instance. One of the things, back when Archie first took the job and, we were kind of breaking it down. I don't remember whether we discussed this here, if this was something that we discussed on the assembly call. One of the things that kind of had my, my guard up, because, when you start hearing about, some of the stuff about Arizona and Sean Miller, and then you kind of make the connection, well, Sean Miller is Archie's biggest, mentor in the business. How much of an influence did he have on, how he's going to run his program? Now that is a totally circumstantial thing, but it's one of those things that just kind of made me have my guard up a little bit, and you think about Adidas and what's come out about them in Kansas and them in Louisville. Indiana is one of their other kind of big flagship schools. So I think, in terms of, are you worried? Some of those bigger picture things, I think, are reasons just to have your guard up a little bit, because, and it's not because there's anything specific there. It's just that, Indiana is now kind of stepping up and competing in some higher leverage, like higher competition recruiting battles. And we're starting to learn a lot more about how some of those things go. And so I think it's totally fair for Indiana fans who, have been burned by recruiting violation stuff before and who really want a clean program to just have your guard up, because you want to make sure that things are being done the right way. And I think that's how a lot of Indiana fans approach this. And so there are different things you can look at circumstantially that maybe give you a little bit of concern. And I think that's totally fine and fair to have. But I don't think it really moves beyond that. I think we should be patient and kind of cautious with that concern until there's actually something more than just really kind of flimsy circumstantial evidence with it. And that's kind of the tack that I'm taking with it.
Yeah.
So, so I think you don't necessarily need to go like one way or the other, like, there's no chance anything is happening, or, well, obviously they're dirty. We see this quote, obviously they're doing things the wrong way. You don't know. So, have your guard up, ask questions, raise your eyebrows, all of those things. I think that's what a good skeptical fan should do. But, until there's actually something really specific there to go on, I can't get too concerned about it. I guess that's where I'm at. It's a little bit conflicted, but that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean, and even going back to your point about Sean Miller, I mean, the reporting that ESPN did last year really, to me, was in a lot of ways somewhat irresponsible, because I mean, it was like they basically, I think Jay Billis went on TV and said Sean Miller should never coach another game. There was reporting by Mark Schleybaugh that was basically insinuating that Sean Miller had cheated, and I think he sat out a game, didn't coach a game, and then nothing's happened since. And so if there really was something there that was substantial enough to warrant them taking action, I think they would have by now. So I mean, yeah, you can't always jump to conclusion just based on what's being put out there. So I think this is one of those things, like you said, Jerod, you have to have an even keel approach, right? You don't want to go too far one way or the other. And the other thing I'll say, this has long been a criticism of the fan base, and don't get me wrong, I love Indiana fans, but some of them are so quick to eat their own, right? I mean, it's like,
yeah,
you have to step back for a second and say, let's not get too caught up on what people are saying on Twitter or what's being said. Let's take a step back. Let's look at what we actually have, which I think we've broken it down pretty well in this podcast. We've kind of gone over what is actually there. And to this point, to me, I see no reason to be overly concerned. Now, if that changes, we'll obviously, talk about it here and we'll write about it. But, I think I've had a couple of people ask me, well, I haven't written anything. To me, like, I didn't write anything about the Tom Crean hugging the guy thing. It was just like, it's kind of it's a blurb in a story about, this trial that's apparently still going on. I think they're still deliberating. Maybe they'll reach a verdict here while we're recording.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I shared this with you for the banner morning. I didn't know if I wanted to even include the Ostrom thing because it's like, well, I don't just want to say what happened because without the context, it's really easy to kind of jump to conclusions about that. So I ended up including it just because I kind of felt like if you're going over the important news and notes on a daily basis, that would qualify. But yeah, it's and you make a good point about even Sean Miller. I think we do have to be careful about jumping to too many conclusions just based on what people say. Because, that's one of the things when you listen to, some coaches and some people who really are kind of deep in the thick of this kind of stuff, as they've kind of been analyzing this trial and the details that have come out, coaches say stuff sometimes, maybe to kind of stay in the game, or to stay in it with a recruit to kind of see what happens, maybe to see what other schools are doing. You've got middlemen that are trying to play schools off of each other that may say that a coach said something, but you don't really know if the coach actually said that. They may be trying to leverage it into a different offer. Like, there's a lot of things that could be going on here, and we do kind of owe it to people to give them the benefit of the doubt if there's not actual evidence of wrongdoing. Like, it can't just be the words, because the way that this stuff goes down sometimes the words don't actually match the actions. And if we're going to start prosecuting people, in this sense of it from an NCAA perspective based just on words, things could get real dicey real fast, and that could be a slippery slope. And that's actually something that I've learned, and it's kind of made me change my reaction to this just a little bit from, kind of first how I was reacting when you see all the stuff about Bill Self and again, some of that stuff is much more compelling about him. There's actually text messages from him, and that, changes the equation a little bit. So especially when it's hearsay, you've got to be real careful, just straight taking that as like, oh, this conversation definitely happened. So anyway.
Right. And it doesn't even, by itself, it doesn't really mean anything, right? It doesn't mean anything happened. It's a comment that may or may not have happened, and even if it did happen, it doesn't mean that something wrong went on. Like I said, that can mean a whole host of things in the context of recruiting. And the whole fascinating part about this whole trial to me is we're only getting, I think, a small glimpse. A blip, so to speak, a blip on the radar of what actually goes on in the sport.
I was told it's not what's happening. That's what I was told, that this is not what's happening.
Well,
a source close to Duke told me that.
Hey, I looked at the radar, and it's more than a blip. So
yes, it is. So anyway, bottom line there, we're not telling you everything is great or nothing's happening. Just be cautious.
Form your own opinion, right?
Yeah.
I think if you've listened to the show long enough, Jerod and I are, as passionate as Jerod can be about things. I don't obviously wear the fan hat based on kind of my role in the my job at this point, but I think those of you that have listened to both of us long enough know that we're pretty straight shooters, and if we thought it was something to be concerned about, we would tell you. But form your own opinions, do your own research, and express your opinion however you want, but don't jump to conclusions. Is all I have to say.
Mm-hmm. And if someone is just giving you a whole bunch of circumstantial evidence, maybe wait for a little bit of actual proof before you fully buy into the yarns that they're spinning. Moving on. Should we hit this last question?
Let's do it.
And then we'll introduce the new show with Seth and Ben. So
sure.
This is from SFR 1108, and he says over under 20 wins for IU this season. Let's know if we'll make a friendly wager if we disagree. That's kind of interesting. He used 20 because that's the forecasted number on T-Rank. I think Ken Palms is the same, right? Does he have Indiana with 20 or 21? I shouldn't say he. I mean he's got Indiana at 20 and 11. Ken Palm.
But if you count up the wins, I should do that real quick.
Yeah, if you count them up, it's more, but the projected record actually takes into account the win probabilities. So understanding that you're not going to win all of those games
if you count them up, I think he's got 23. I'm going over. I mean, that's like
I'm going over too. Yeah. You know what's interesting about especially Ken Palm is the Big Ten teams are really clustered toward the middle because Michigan State is the highest ranked Big Ten team, but their projected Big Ten record is 13-7. And there's not a chance that I guess there's a chance, but it doesn't seem likely that the Big Ten champion is going to have 7 losses. So these kind of record projections can be pretty conservative and kind of clustered toward the middle, especially in the Big Ten where, there aren't kind of clear great teams. But man, that seems overly conservative to Indiana to me. So I would definitely go over.
Yeah. I wish there was, like with the NBA, they publish over under win totals, I think for every team. It's harder to do with college, obviously, because there's so many teams and there's not as much good data out there, but it would be fun. I think we did it a couple of years ago. It might have been 3 or 4 years ago now with Ryan, but we should actually try to figure out some numbers, at least for Big Ten wins for every team, and do an over-under podcast at some point between now and the start of the conference season. Maybe get Andy on to do it, or
that'd be fun.
We have to get a third party. Maybe we could get Bart to actually give us numbers for each team.
All right,
and then we could do it because the problem is if one of us set the numbers, that's not really, I don't think the best way to do it. So if we could have somebody as a third party just kind of give us numbers, and then all of us take a stab at it, I think that'd be a fun podcast. And then we could go back and look at how many we got wrong at the end of the season, which I'm sure would be a lot based yes. on our history.
Yes. Okay. Let's put that in the works. I like that. It's a good idea. Okay. So that brings us to the end of our questions. Thank you all very much for submitting those. A lot of juicy topics to discuss. I enjoyed that, Alex. I'm sure that you did too. And now we have something special for you here. As I mentioned in the opening, this is probably going to be the longest episode of Podcast on the Brink ever because it's a 2-parter. So we've got this audio mailbag, and now you're going to get the first episode of The Matchup, which is a new podcast that our interns Seth Toe and Ben Ladner are going to be doing, giving you insight on the teams that Indiana is facing, kind of, the keys to that game, and also, giving you their insight on Indiana as the season goes along. And so we wanted to put this first episode, after the mailbag, so we had a chance to kind of introduce it, set the stage. But as we move forward in the future, you'll get these episodes stand alone in your Podcast on the Brink feed. So you don't need to subscribe anywhere else, do anything else. They'll just, pop up here. You'll see them denoted as The Matchup, so you'll know what it is. But Alex, I want to turn this over to you, but I'm really excited about this. Number one, because I think this is going to be useful content that we haven't had a chance to get to in the past. So I'm glad that we'll be able to do this on a consistent basis, but also because these two guys are really good. Just really smart basketball fans who give really good insight. And it's one of those things where, like, I'm going to be listening to the show to learn from them, because just based on my experience, reading their work, seeing stuff that they've done, these guys really know the game. And we wouldn't give them their own show on this podcast feed if we didn't believe that. So they've earned it.
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot privately over the last couple of weeks, that I think both Seth and Ben have really hit the ground running. They've been enthusiastic about their work. They've asked questions. They've contributed valuable content already, and I think this is kind of just the next extension of that. It's been a pleasure to work with both of them this year. I'm excited actually for the games to start, just so they're going to have a little bit more to do rather than just writing the player previews. And I know they do a lot of great work with Six Banner Sunday, but I'm excited for them to get to cover some games and give their insight and tell some stories as the years go along. I mean, I think Seth did a great job with the story that he did earlier this season on Cliff Marshall. I think Ben the other day, the breakdown that he did on the pick and roll coverages on the Monday show that you did, that was phenomenal. So yeah. We're glad to have this, and we hope everyone will stay tuned here, listen to it, and if you like it, it'll be a regular part of the feed for the duration of the season. So looking forward to listening and having these guys as a part of the team for this season.
Yep. So without further ado, here is the first episode of The Matchup. Seth and Ben taking kind of a macro look at Indiana's schedule and the team. We will play that for you now, and Alex and I will be back to talk with you next week. Here you go.
Hello and welcome to The Matchup. I'm Ben Ladner, joined by Seth Tao. How you doing, man? I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm actually doing pretty well. It's been a good day. I voted. I got Jack McCallum's new book. I had 3 great meals. I'm feeling good. It's about 7:00 on a Monday night, so
it sounds like you did 3 different counts of civic duty today.
I did. So it's been a solid day, yeah. And I'm looking forward to talking some IU hoops. We, by the way, are this year's Inside the Hall and Assembly Call interns. Are interns? Are we interns or do we? What's our title?
Writers,
we
interns,
work for the sites.
Whatever you want us to be.
We're students. We're both seniors at Indiana, and we're looking forward to the season. Looking forward to talking. Right now, I think what we're going to do here is just kind of run through the schedule for the upcoming basketball season and kind of go deeper into the games that intrigue us more. Obviously, Chicago State probably won't offer a whole lot of depth into that matchup, but you move down into the teams like Duke and Louisville, Butler, kind of some of those higher profile teams, and just kind of look at IU's chances, look at their overall outlook for the season, kind of mix all of that in the next 30, 45 minutes or so.
And that's really what we're going to do throughout the season on this show as well. We're going to dive deeper into the upcoming and recent matchups that Indiana's had, hence our name, The Matchup.
The Matchup. Anyway, let's start off. Opening night is November 6th. That is about 3 weeks from now.
Yes.
Against Chicago State. Anything to offer on Chicago State?
No. Yeah, I mean, it's opening night, and granted, Indiana lost on opening night last year.
We thought Indiana State was a win.
Yes, but I would be shocked if it would be much more of an upset if Indiana loses this game than I think it was last year. Yeah. Even though last year was still an upset.
Yeah, big time. And also, Chicago State is, and really any team is probably not going to shoot as well as Indiana State did last year.
Right,
against
obviously.
Indiana. And Indiana's more talented.
Indiana's defense improved vastly even just last year, and you have to imagine with the full offseason with the system and new pieces in place that it's only gotten better.
Yeah. Then Marquette. That's where we get to some of the interesting meat of the schedule. That's on November 14th, a Wednesday night in Bloomington. You've done more scouting or research into Marquette than I have. What are they looking like early here in the season?
Well, they missed the tournament last year. They finished number 53 in KenPom, so they were one of the 68 best teams in the country nonetheless. Marquette is a little bit in a similar place as IU, looking to get back to the tournament. A lot of returning players, and the big name with Marquette is Marcus Howard. Could be one of the better players in the country. A little 5'11" guard, but scored 20 points per game last year, and there's no reason to think he can't replicate that. Specifically against Indiana, you have to expect him to have a tougher night just because that's going to be in Assembly Hall. I expect Devonte Green to be covering him. I think that's the matchup that makes the most sense.
Yeah, point guard defense is going to be really interesting this year, and I think also center defense, kind of the bookends of the lineup, because Indiana has a ton of wing depth. They've got a bunch of forwards, a lot of big guards. I think I was checking this the other day. They have 8 guys between 6'6" and 6'8". So they just have all these wings and forwards they can throw out on the floor. But you run into a guy like Marcus Howard or any of the other great point guards, Carson Edwards, that Indiana's going to play in the Big Ten and elsewhere. And I don't know that. I guess Devonte Green probably is that guy. He's a good defender, smart guy, uses his hands well, gets caught in the cookie jar occasionally and commits fouls that he doesn't need to, but generally has pretty good hands and is able to bother opposing guards and fights over screens. And I think you're right that he probably gets the matchup there, but I think maybe you look at a guy like Al Durham who's got some length.
Yeah.
And
then really bulked up this offseason.
Right. And if you feel like you want to throw different looks at Marcus Howard, maybe you alternate between those two guys. I don't know that Rob Finney as a freshman is going to come right in and be able to have the defensive wherewithal to guard
a freshman in the third game of the season.
Right. That seems unlikely to me. Maybe you put a bigger guy, maybe you put Romeo Langford on him and just say that, okay, almost like Al Durham, but to a greater degree, and just say we're going to put as much length and quickness on him as we can and just take away the looks that he likes to get. I don't know enough about Marcus Howard's game individually to know how he likes to score and what spots of the floor and if he's a jump shooter or get to the rim, but depending on his style and what kind of defensive personnel you feel you have, maybe you you change things up. But I would expect Green to kind of be that main guy.
Yeah, especially early in the season. Later as Indiana's played more, it may not always be Green getting those types of matchups. But in the third game of the season, I would be surprised if it's not Devonte Green covering Marcus Howard.
Yeah, so we move on to the next game after that, actually, is Arkansas, which the announcement for that I feel like was it's a home and home with Arkansas the next couple of years.
Yeah, there was one other point I did want to make about Marquette.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
I think this is the first big. This is the first big test that Romeo Langford's going to face. I think, and I think he's the X factor there. I think both teams I talked about how both teams bring back depth and experience, and I think Romeo is the X factor in that. Marquette does have a good freshman forward coming in, but Romeo's going to be the highest ranked freshman on the court in almost every game Indiana plays, and he's arguably the biggest impact player on the court between either two teams, either Indiana or Marquette. I think it'll be interesting to see if Romeo can, even at home, can still rise up to the challenge of playing a good team early in the season.
Yeah, whether he's ready to do that this early on in his career is going to be a question. And maybe if they do catch an opponent who's hot and they don't really have all the pieces together, maybe they are susceptible to an early season loss.
Yeah, definitely.
So they move on to Arkansas. That'll be on Sunday, November 18th, afternoon tip in Fayetteville. Are you going to that game?
No, I'm not.
I don't think I'm going to that game either. Arkansas,
Arkansas is interesting. They were a solid team last year. They lost in the first round to Butler in the NCAA tournament, a 7 seed. They finished number 44 in KenPom. They were 30th in the country in points per game with 80.5 points per game, and they shot the three ball in their 3-point percentage was the top 20 in the country. So they were a pretty good shooting and scoring team last year. But the only thing is there's a lot of roster turnover this year. They had graduated 6 seniors last year, including their top 2 scorers and their 3 big heavy minute guys. So there's a lot of turnover. It'll be interesting. They're going to need somebody to step up in terms of leadership off the court and obviously on the court. Yeah. And they're going to need people to kind of step up and pick up the production. They do have one key guy returning, Daniel Gafford, who led them in rebounding and blocks. And they have a transfer from New Mexico, Jalen Harris, that becomes eligible this year. And they're bringing in 7 freshmen this year.
Jeez.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
All 3-star freshmen. We'll see. I would be surprised if they're making an impact early in the season when they're playing Indiana. So I think more than anything, it's just good for Indiana to be getting a road contest that early in the season.
Yeah. And you mentioned Gafford. I know some people, it wasn't quite consensus, but some people were talking about him as a lottery pick last year.
Wow.
And he decided to stay. I think that was a pretty distinct minority among draft experts, but I know there were a few out there who viewed him that way. Obviously decided to come back to school. Draft stock wise, we'll see how that plays out, but neither Arkansas nor Indiana is worried about Daniel Gafford's draft stock right now. Obviously more about this game. Yeah, he's a beast inside. Good athlete, I think about 6'10", 6'11", who can get up. Not quite as athletic as Robert Williams, the guy he was compared to last year for Texas A&M. But he's got a great motor. He plays hard, great rebounder, like you said, leads them in rebounding and blocks. And he's going to be a force to be reckoned with inside. I'll be interested to see not defensively, but offensively how Indiana, and I guess also defensively, but how Indiana deals with him, because will Deron Davis be healthy enough at that point in the season to play major minutes? Will you have to play Juwan Morgan in those small lineups? If so, can he handle a guy like Gafford, who's physical and plays hard and is much bigger than Juwan Morgan? Is Evan Fitzner strong enough to hold up inside? I think they will probably have to end up putting Juwan Morgan on him and just say, hey, look, you guarded bigger guys last year. You're going to have to do it again this year, and use, Fitzner. I think probably defensively doesn't quite have the strength, maybe a little light in the shorts to guard a guy like Daniel Gafford down low, and the athleticism, obviously, Juwan Morgan's a great athlete, even if he is a little bit smaller than Gafford.
And the trouble would really come if Deron Davis gets an early foul trouble in that game, because Gafford is 6'11", and while Indiana has a lot more,
as though there's some sort of question as to whether he might get into foul trouble.
I said early foul trouble.
Still.
Yeah. Well, regardless, Gafford is 6'11", and Davis, Clifton Moore, and Evan Fitzner, they're all 6'10". So if you mentioned Fitzner, that could be another option if Davis has to take a seat for a while.
And I don't think Moore's an option there.
No, definitely not. Besides that, I mean,
maybe Justin Smith.
I was thinking that too. But you're still giving up 4 inches if you put Justin Smith on him.
You are, but he's got some strength. He's a great athlete, and he competes on defense. I wouldn't be surprised if they alternate Smith and Morgan on Gafford and just give him different looks, and more than anything, just to spare those guys the physical toll. Gafford's not a huge scorer. He's kind of a roll to the rim, lob, energy guy. He's really good in that role, but he's not like a dominant one-on-one scorer. So if you just tell Justin Smith or Juwan Morgan or whoever, like, hey, box this guy out and keep him off the glass, then maybe you have a little bit of success there, because I don't think you worry about him just torching you in the post.
Yeah, definitely. Those are good points. And another name that they might be able to get away with guarding Gafford for a short stretch is Jake Forrester.
That's a great point. I totally forgot about him.
if he's able to earn the minutes to get some court time that early in the season, I could see them sticking Forrester on Gafford.
Yeah, and his big calling card is his energy and his length and his athleticism. So that's a great point. And maybe if it's just the last 2 minutes of the first half.
Right.
One other note on Arkansas, you mentioned that 39.5% from 3. Indiana was terrible guarding the 3 for much of last season. And like you said, that did improve, but they still were not great defending 3s. I wonder what they did a lot last year. They doubled the post pretty liberally. I mean, it was either on the catch or on the first dribble. I mean, guys like Anis Mahmoud of Louisville, who are not great post scorers. I wonder if they do that against Gafford. They could change up their scheme and play it a little bit differently, but I wonder if they'll do that against Gafford. And if so, is he a good enough passer to find those shooters out on the perimeter passing out of the post? Because a lot of teams hurt Indiana that way last season.
Yeah, they do lose their 2 top 3-point shooters from last year. Their 2 top scorers last year were their 2 top 3-point shooters. Shocking, I know, but they do lose those guys. So it's all, aside from Gafford's really the only known commodity that you have with Arkansas. There's just a lot of question marks, and I don't know. There's a decent chance that Indiana might be Arkansas's first big test of the season. So we may not know that much more about Arkansas going into that game, a few days heading into that game, than we do right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Next big game on the schedule, little later in November, UC Davis. I'm just kidding. No, Duke on November 27th, Tuesday night in Durham. I think I'm going to that game. Are you going to try to make it to that one?
I'm trying. We're trying.
That's obviously the biggest game of the year, at least in the regular season. I mean, maybe if there's a lot on the line in the last game for, Big Ten standing, maybe for the foreseeable future, that Duke game is the biggest game of the year.
And it's undoubtedly the biggest non-conference game of the year because of the opportunity it represents playing a team like that on the road. That's the best win you could get in the eyes of the committee.
Yeah, easily the most talented team Indiana will see all season unless they make a Final Four. You said earlier that Romeo Langford's going to be the highest rated or most talented freshman in every game.
This is the exception. Yeah, it's going to be tough sledding for Indiana with Zion Williamson, Cam Reddish, and R.J. Barrett all on the going against the Hoosiers. And when you look at this game, it's the type of game where they're going to need their supporting cast to step up and help out, because Romeo Langford and Juwan Morgan will not be able to win this game on their own in Durham. They will need some role player bench guys, like they may need like some Jerome Hunter contribution there. They may need.
I think Jerome Hunter will play a role in this game.
Yes, they'll need like a Jerome Hunter contribution. They'll need Devonte Green to be hitting some shots. They'll need guys like that to step up and make plays.
Yeah, and I think as good as Duke is, as much as we kind of have hyped them up the last 2 minutes or so, it's a winnable game for Indiana, to be certain. And I think they match up fairly well with Duke, to the extent that you can match up well with Duke. I think Indiana does, because like I said earlier, they've got all these guys who are between 6'6" and 6'8", just all these wings. And Duke's best players are all wings and forwards. So you can at least try to match up there. I think last year it was difficult because Wendell Carter and Marvin Bagley were just such terrors down low, and Indiana really only had one guy that they felt truly comfortable defending those guys, and it was Juwan Morgan. And other than that, you kind of took your chances and just hoped that one of those two guys had an off night. Here, I think you have Justin Smith, you have Jerome Hunter, Juwan Morgan, Romeo Langford, these bigger, longer guys that can guard on the perimeter that you can put on Cam Reddish and RJ Barrett and Zion Williamson. Those Duke's players are better than Indiana's players, I think, but you at least have a little bit to lean on as far as matchups. Yeah,
the offensively, the matchup I'm looking at with IU is Deron Davis, because it might be easy to forget with how after Davis went down last season, but Davis, maybe his best game of the year last year was against Duke. He shot 6 for 7 for 16 points and 5 rebounds.
Got to the free throw line
Duke.
A ton.
Right, yeah, and that was with Marvin Bagley and Wendell Carter going up against him. And this year, Duke's best players are probably not going to be matching up with Deron Davis down low. They might be able to get away with sticking Cam Reddish on him, but they'd still be giving up some size, and that is one less player to guard. Maybe some of Indiana's wing threats, especially if Evan Fitzner could be the key there. Since he's got the height and he can shoot. If he catches fire, that would be big for Indiana in that game. But back to the point I was making, Deron Davis now may end up going up against a Marcus Bolden or Javon DeLaurier in that game. Could he even have a better game than he had last year against Duke?
It's possible, yeah. And Bolden, I think, will probably be the starter for them. And he was kind of unlucky last year because it was looking like he was going to maybe start or at least be the sixth man, and then Bagley signed on late, and all of a sudden, where does that leave Bolden? And he was kind of out of the rotation a little bit. But he should play a bigger role this year. I think he's kind of, they don't really have that many real big men on this roster. I'm looking through it. It's him and Antonio Vrankovic from Croatia. And he doesn't figure to play that much, I don't think. So they're going to lean on him a lot. They probably will play Zion Williamson at the 5 a good deal because he's 6'7", 285 and just a freak athlete. But if you play him at the 5, who guards Juwan Morgan? And if that person is Cam Reddish or RJ Barrett, do they have the strength and the size to stay with him? Maybe Reddish does. He's a little bit bigger guy, but still both those guys pretty inexperienced. You're asking a freshman to guard one of the best players and a senior in the Big Ten.
And the thing is, if you're going to stick both a Reddish and a Williamson in the post, then they could end up being shorthanded against a Romeo Langford.
Right. So, I mean, Duke has the depth, I think. I mean, I think they can cover their bases. And then we didn't even mention Trey Jones, who is a really, really talented point guard out of Minnesota, who, like his brother Tyus Jones, who also played at Duke, kind of that same sort of game manager, but has some scoring ability, can shoot the ball, and is able to control the offense in ways that I think will really help Duke. It's the same question we had for Marquette, is which point guard do you trust to guard the opposing team's point guard?
Right. The other thing to keep in mind is the home court advantage that Duke is going to play with. Yes. As much as we factor that in here, it's just as big over there. Duke has only lost 6 home games over the last 5 years total. 6 home games
that
total.
Is insane.
And they're all ACC games. So they have not lost a non-conference game.
At least one of those was to
UNC.
Go Heels.
Yeah. So it's the type of thing where Indiana's going to need to be at their best for 40 minutes because especially if Duke is coming into that game riding high, it has the potential to get ugly if Indiana has, like a 4 to 5 minute stretch where they just can't find the bucket.
Yeah. And you talk about a test for Romeo Langford. I mean, a freshman going into an environment like Cameron Indoor Stadium, playing against his peers, the only 3 basically in the country that are ranked higher than him. I mean, that could be a proving ground for him. Maybe he goes into that game thinking like, these guys, like everyone thinks these guys are better than me, and they're all on the same team, and maybe he takes that as an opportunity to kind of prove his worth and raise his draft stock kind of within this class. So he's going to have a really good game, obviously. The one thing with Duke, I don't know how good their shooting is, so maybe that could help Indiana defensively because Williamson's not a great shooter. RJ Barrett's an okay shooter. Cameron Reddish is an okay shooter, but we haven't really seen it translate to the college game yet. Trey Jones can shoot a little bit, but they don't have quite the floor spacing that they did last season when they had Grayson Allen and Gary Trent. We'll see. I don't think this is as highly as Duke is ranked and as unknown as Indiana is. I expect this to be a game. I mean, I really do expect this to be more competitive than last season's.
It definitely could be, and I think there are a decent number of Indiana fans that at the same time would honestly just take a game that's closer than it was when they played at Cameron in 2015.
Yeah, if you go in there and lose by 5 and Langford looks good, look, it's only the 10th game of the season, something like that. It's early in the year. It's certainly the point in the season where you can take positives from a loss without feeling like the season is over and everything's a catastrophe. So yeah, it's an opportunity for Indiana not only to prove itself, but to kind of measure itself, because this is a team with Final Four and championship ambitions. And if you want to get that far, these are the teams that you have to beat. And just because you can't beat them early in the season doesn't mean that you won't eventually get to the point where you can beat them. And if you're not at that point early in the season, it's better to find out in a test game like this and see, okay, this is where we need to improve. This is what we're good at. This is what we're not good at. And be able to make those adjustments over the course of a season.
Right. And that's exactly what happened when they played there 3 years ago. They got blown out of the gym, but they ended up turning it way around pretty much because of that Duke game. The other thing that's going to help Indiana in that game is that it's not going to be their first road game of the season. The fact that they're able to get that Arkansas game in Arkansas on the schedule before, like about a week before they go to Duke, is huge. Just getting guys like Romeo, Langford, and Jerome Hunter, the Rob Finney, all those freshmen, the new guys acclimated to playing on the road in a college game. That's big. Obviously, Duke is a different animal, but it's still just, there's something much different about playing on the road versus playing at home in general. And it would be rough for them it would be even more rough for the new guys having their first road game be at Cameron Indoor Stadium.
Absolutely. They move on to play Northwestern the following Saturday after that in Bloomington, then jet back out to University Park to play Penn State, then come back to Bloomington for a Big Ten ACC game with Louisville. So they finally get Louisville at home in Bloomington. You and I obviously will both be at that game. That is the last game before finals week, so they'll have a break between there. But let's dive into that Louisville game a little bit.
They're going to look a lot different this year, if only just because of the new head coach, Chris Mack, takes over. Right. Chris Mack is a great coach, and he'll have that program in the right direction within a couple years. But I don't know if it's going to happen this year. When you look at that roster, at least especially when you dive into the IU Louisville game from last year, I mean, the only guy that started for Louisville in that game that returns is VJ King, and he didn't play a very big role for Louisville last year. Anas Mahmoud and Deng Adel are both gone.
And Quentin Snyder. Ray Spalding's gone. 4 of their best players from last year are gone. They didn't add any freshmen to the fold this year. They added like 3 grad transfers who didn't play major roles at the places they played before. Richmond transfer Quan Four he at least played big minutes last year. Played 32 minutes per game with Richmond, but scoring 11 points per game there. So that he might end up being like their best player. But it's going to be if Louisville's going to be good, and I think people might be overhyping them a little bit just because of the name and the fact that they have Chris Mack now. If Louisville is going to be good this year, they're going to need some of these guys that played supporting roles in the past to be able to step in, not only just step into the starting role, but play well in the starting role. Yeah, and I think that starts with VJ King. He was a top 20-ish recruit coming out of high school, and a pretty big name, was, I believe, an McDonald's All-American, and kind of in that circuit of the elite high school players. And when he got to Louisville, whether it was because of the talent in front of him or just the fit or whatever, he didn't quite have the start that I think a lot of people were looking for. And this is the year that he's going to be able to step into those shoes and be the guy. And, whether he can be that guy is probably going to determine their success this season. So I expect them to be competitive, and they're not going to win the ACC. I don't think they're not going to be an elite team, but this could very well be a tournament team. This could be a team that competes for one of the 3 through 6 spots in the ACC, and I think another good proving ground for Indiana.
Yeah, definitely. They could definitely end up being a tournament team, but to say they'll finish in the top 5 of the ACC, I think
could happen.
It could happen, but I need to see it with Louisville this year before I believe it.
Yeah.
I would expect Juwan Morgan, I guess, to guard VJ King. King's 6'6", 215, a forward.
I'd probably go Justin Smith.
Yeah, that might make more sense.
I think in those matchups when it's combo forward / power forward and you need, and they're the main option. When you have the choice between Morgan and Smith, at least if it were me, I would generally opt toward giving Smith that matchup because of what I mentioned earlier. You just want to, if you can reduce Juwan Morgan's workload on the defensive end and make him that much fresher on offense, I think you would prefer to do that than to have this two-way burden, forced upon him. And Justin Smith, I think, is probably a little bit better on-ball defender just because he can sit down in a stance. It's probably a little quicker laterally, side to side. And Juwan Morgan's really good as a help defender coming over for blocks from the weak side. So I think you use Smith as the primary defender, and his length and his strength, I think, could really bother BJ King.
Yeah. So we'll move on from that. You mentioned the Butler game is the next game right after Louisville. That's Saturday, December 15th in Indianapolis. That's the Crossroads Classic this year for Indiana. Butler had a pretty good season last year. They finished number 20 in KenPom. They must have gone up a little bit after the NCAA tournament because they were a 10 seed in the tournament. They beat Arkansas, then lost to Purdue in the second round. They lose one of their best players from the past few years. Keelan Martin is gone, but Kamar Baldwin is still there. He will cause problems. He was a thorn in the side of IU the last time these two teams matched up. And overall, I don't know. I think Indiana may have the more talented roster here. I'm not sure if I don't think they have the experience to match up with Juwan Morgan. I think Morgan is the key in this matchup.
I was going to say a similar thing. I just think Indiana's more talented. I think they get this game. I mean, given who they lost, and look, Butler's always disciplined. They always play hard, kind of similar to Louisville, like we were talking about. But I just think Indiana has more talent. I think they get this game.
But and Baldwin's not an easy player to defend. That's the type of guy who he's going to get his, and you just need to find ways to get yours.
Yeah, and I think Indiana will. I mean, like I said, they have so many multiple scoring options. Just different guys they can turn to, lots of defensive options. I think, like I said, I just think they have more talent here.
I agree. So Indiana plays Michigan twice this year, Sunday, January 3rd in Ann Arbor, and then at home Friday, January 25th in Bloomington. Michigan won the Big Ten tournament last year, went to the national championship game, and the year before that, went to the national championship game last year. They obviously lose three of their best players in Mo Wagner, Duncan Robinson, and Muhammad Ali Abdur-Rahman. Announcers, I'm sure, are glad that they don't have to say Muhammad Ali Abdur-Rahman.
I'm not. I liked that guy. I liked broadcasting his games.
I liked him as a player. That being said, Michigan still figures to be towards the top of the Big Ten this year, and that it's always been a tough matchup for Indiana when they've played Michigan.
Yes. And I think it'll continue to be that way. I expect Michigan to win the Big Ten. I think they're the best team in the Big Ten. I think John Beilein is the best coach in the Big Ten. There's a lot to dive into with Michigan here, and I love this team. I've liked Michigan for the last 2 years. They did lose their three of their best guys, I should say. But they lost their two best players in Derek Walton and Zach Irvin the year before that, and they went on to win the Big Ten tournament and make the national title.
And DJ Wilson.
Exactly. So again, and that's why I think Beilein is so good, is just because he keeps stocking the roster. Guys just step up into new roles, and Beilein gets the most out of them every single year. So I think they're going to be really good. I do think if there's one guy you can point to, and I told you this on our radio show the other day, but if there's one guy you can point to that's going to be maybe a little bit of an underrated loss, it's Abdur-Rahman. I think he was extremely important to what they did. His defense, his ball handling, and his shooting was essential to them, to their system on both ends of the floor. I included this in my Michigan preview, which is up on InsideTheHall.com. He was the only person to combine shooting, passing, and low turnovers as efficiently as he did in the entire country. He had 132 assists to just 30 turnovers last season, which is insane.
Goodness.
So I think he's a really key loss for them. I'm skeptical of how they're going to replace him in the rotation, but Jordan Poole looked really good last year. They have Xavier Simpson coming back. They have Eli Brooks, I think, who was coming back. So they're going to have options in the backcourt. I just don't know that any of them are quite as solid as Abdur-Rahman or have quite the institutional knowledge. And then in the front court, obviously, you look at Mo Wagner, the hole that he leaves. I don't know if there's one clear-cut guy who replaces him. I think it's more likely that they kind of just reorient their offense through different channels. and use different methods of scoring, maybe make it a more outside focused type of offense rather than dumping the ball into Wagner and making him the focal point. So their centers certainly are not as strong. They're not as good. Obviously don't have the shooting touch that Wagner did, but I think they can compensate for that in other ways.
Yeah, Charles Matthews is going to be the guy for Michigan this year. And I think Michigan's fortunes are going to really lay in the hands of how guys like Xavier Simpson, Jordan Poole, Eli Brooks, some of those guys are going to need to really step into more prominent roles for Michigan, and they could be secondary scorers last year. They need to be primary scorers this year.
Yeah, and I think Poole is the biggest example of that. He flashed some really nice shooting potential last year, and he got up a lot of shots. I mean, he didn't play a ton of minutes, but he was in the rotation, and when he was on the floor, he was not afraid to shoot the ball. And now he's going to have more minutes. He's going to have more opportunity to shoot. He shot around 37%.
I got it up. He shot 37% last year, played 12.5 minutes per game. And in what might be my favorite quote in all of college basketball last year, after he hit the buzzer beater to send Michigan to the Sweet 16, John Beilein on the court said that Jordan Poole has, quote, an overdose of swag.
Well, he does. He does. And he can shoot the ball. He's defensively, there could be questions there. So I think Matthews is probably the more reliable defender on the wing, but Poole's shooting is going to be really, really important for them. And whether he can sustain that 37% clip is going to be one of the major questions for their season. And as far as Matthews, I think he could be a first team All Big Ten type of guy.
Oh, definitely.
6'6", long arms, good defender, good passer, needs to shoot the ball better. He only shot about 32% from three last year. If he's going to be their primary scorer and a guy that's going to take more threes, he's got to hit them at a higher clip. Same with Xavier Simpson. So those two, if they can take their shooting up, not even to like the upper 30s, but if they can just be mid 30s from three, Michigan is going to be close to unguardable on offense.
Now, do you think IU sticks Justin Smith on Charles Matthews?
So that's an interesting question because I don't know who IU is going to start. And if they start small, then it could be a different answer than if they start big. And so if they start three guards, then it's probably Romeo Langford. If they start three forwards, then it's probably Justin Smith. So Matthews, I don't know if Smith is quite quick enough to keep up with Matthews off the dribble for an entire game. I think he can, if you ask him to be a switch guy who just, stay in front of this point guard for the final 10 seconds of a possession, he can do that. But if you're asking him to run off screens and stay in front of isolations off the dribble and fight over screens on the pick and roll and do all that sort of stuff for 30 minutes a game, I think that's a little bit different challenge. So I think Langford's probably a little bit more adept at doing that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we touched on IU's point guard play, how that's going to be important this year earlier in the show. And I think especially in the matchups with Michigan, that's going to be really, really important. The point guard, not just point guard defense, like we said before, point guard offense and point guard defense as well. Because Xavier Simpson is a plus defender for Michigan. And it's going to be interesting to see how guys like Devonte Green and Rob Finney how they attack Michigan's defense when they take the ball up the court and have Xavier Simpson waiting for them.
And Michigan, too, I think worth noting, never turns the ball over. That's what makes them so good on offense, is they're just so disciplined that even if they don't have a great game shooting, they just don't give their opponents any extra possessions. And so Indiana hasn't really been a team that relies on creating turnovers the last few years, but teams that do feast on that and try to just poach extra opportunities tend to struggle a little bit more against Michigan because of that.
Yeah, but the Indiana-Michigan games this year should be very competitive. Two teams that should be among the best in the Big Ten, and I'm really, really looking forward to both of those matchups.
Me too. Yeah, especially the one in Bloomington. I just think especially if Michigan's as good as I expect them to be by that point in the year, I think that's going to be a great home crowd, a great environment, and a good test for Indiana.
That could conceivably be a top 15 matchup by that point in the year. We'll move on to the Friday, January 11th contest at Maryland. And Maryland missed postseason play completely last year, just like Indiana. Should be improved this year. I think they'll finish in the top half of the Big Ten. They kind of profile as a bubble team, but they have players that can cause IU problems. And also, I think it was worth throwing this game into the discussion just because Maryland I think Maryland and Indiana are the two toughest arenas to play in the Big Ten.
Interesting.
At least from my experience and just from watching games play, even just on TV played at these arenas, I would put Indiana and Maryland as the toughest two places to play in the Big Ten.
You know, what stands out to me about this matchup is how weird it is that Indiana would play an ACC team this late in the season. I'm with you. I think they're a bubble team. I think they're good but not great. I like Anthony Cowan. I think his ability to get to the basket gave Indiana a lot of trouble last year.
The defensive battle between Cowan and Devonte Green was really exhilarating last year.
Yeah, Cowan could be one of the 3 or 4 best point guards in the Big Ten this year. He's decent shooter, can get, like I said, get to the basket, good distributor, averaged over 5 assists last season for Maryland. Not having Kevin Huerter I can't believe I'm going to say this, could hurt them. There was I walked right into it. It was not intentional, I promise. But Bruno Fernando figures to step in and take some of that scoring load.
Maryland is going to be a front court team this year with Bruno Fernando, and they have 5-star.
Excluding Cowan.
Well, yes, Cowan's going to make plays, but I think where Maryland could cause problems for opponents this year is in the front court with Bruno Fernando, and they have 5-star center Jalen Smith coming in, who is number 16 in the 24/7 Sports Composite. So that's a pretty highly ranked prospect, especially for Indiana. 2 big, talented centers like that could be a big problem.
Yeah, and I'm really interested to see, not just for this game, but for the whole season, how Maryland balances those 2 guys. Against Indiana, you're right, a kind of a smaller team. You know, Indiana's depth on the wing is I think a net asset for the season as a whole, but in certain matchups like this one, I think can be maybe a little bit of a weakness because they, aside from Deron Davis, they don't really have that guy who is going to willingly bang inside and is kind of suited to play that defensive style. So I don't know what they counter with there. Maybe it is more Jake Forrester. Again, I think this is a game where Indiana just has more talent. It could be a tough matchup. Maryland is going to put up a fight. I like where they're kind of headed, but I think not having Huerter, the guy who can just get a bucket whenever he wants, basically, I think not having that sort of offensive player, they just don't have quite the offensive talent to hang with Indiana in this game.
The reason to fear this game if you're IU is that it's in College Park, Maryland, tough place to play, and it's pretty much a make or break year for Mark Turgeon there. Yeah. And these are the games that the Terps need to win if they're just going to get back to the tournament, and B, if Turgeon wants to really stay around longer. I think he could be on the hot seat this year.
Interesting. We'll certainly keep an eye on that. They've got Nebraska on January 14th, and they move on to West Lafayette and play Purdue. How do we feel about Purdue this year? I don't know where to place Purdue in the Big Ten. I don't know what to think of them. They have Carson Edwards, who might be the best player in the conference, but is Matt Harms going to step into a huge role? You know, is Nogel Eastern going to have a breakout season? I just don't know that they have that second guy who you trust to be that complementary player to Carson Edwards.
Yeah. If you're having faith in Purdue this year, you're having faith that some of the depth guys they had last year are going to be able to step into the starting roles and fill in for guys like PJ Thompson, Dakota Mathias, Vincent Edwards, and Isaac Haas, for great players for Purdue. And it'll be interesting. I mean, they still have talent there besides Carson Edwards. They still have, you mentioned Nogel Eastern, Ryan Klein, Matt Harms. They have guys that can make plays for Purdue. Do I expect them to win the Big Ten? No, but I think they could be a tournament team. I think they'll be maybe top half. I think they'll definitely be top half of the Big Ten. They could end up top third of the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think they're probably around that 5 to 6 range with some upward mobility, but also some downward mobility. I mean, if things crash and burn, certainly if Carson Edwards misses any time for any reason, I mean, that could really put a damper on their season. So
it's definitely good that Indiana and Purdue are playing twice again. It is. It's good for college basketball.
Yeah, it's not right to have them only play one. You got to have, one home, one away for each team. It's just not right to do it any other way.
But as a whole, I think Indiana has less to deal with against Purdue than they did last year defensively. I think Carson Edwards is obviously going to cause problems, and they will need to figure out a good strategy for shutting him down, something that's really not easy to do.
Yeah.
But that being said, I think Indiana is going to have more depth than Purdue will, and overall, because of that, I think Indiana may have the more talented roster. But again, this is such a big rivalry that I would almost expect them to split these two contests.
Yeah. Next big game is February 2nd. a time still has not been determined for this one, but it's Michigan State in East Lansing. Michigan State, another team that's lost a lot of talent over the last year, and I think will probably take a step back, is I think that people are overrating Michigan State this year because I'm not totally sold on Nick Ward in the role that he's going to be in. I think he's fine if he's your fourth or fifth option. I just don't trust him to be that second option, which I think he probably figures to be this year on a really good team like I think people are talking about Michigan State.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I picked Michigan State to win the Big Ten, and I think it's because people underrate how much Cassius Winston did for that team last year and the impact that I think he will have on the team this year. All anyone wants to talk about with Michigan State is how they lost Miles Bridges and Jaren Jackson. But
which are big losses.
Huge losses, and I'm not downplaying that. But Cassius Winston is a great, great player and was one of Michigan State's best players last year, and I think he's an all-Big Ten first team All Big Ten type of player this year.
Well, he's another guy which I agree with what you said, but he's another guy that take away Bridges and Jackson, and does he look as good? Was he driving Michigan State's success, or were those other two guys driving his success, which was in turn making it appear like he was driving the team's success? Does that make sense?
No, that's definitely a fair question to ask.
So it's worth wondering, obviously he played a big role in their success and is a really important player and a great player, but if he doesn't have that complementary talent, if he doesn't have two lottery picks playing next to him, are those little things that he does, those little leadership traits that he has, the passes that he throws, his game management ability, his pick and roll play, does any of that look as good without great players next to him?
Yeah, and it'll be a challenge for Indiana to try to stop him. And along with, they have other good returners as well. Josh Langford will be good for them, I think. Could we see a Langford versus Langford matchup?
No, I like Josh Langford. I don't think he's going to be an all Big Ten sort of player or anything, but he could feasibly lead that team in scoring. And I think for them to win the Big Ten, he'd probably have to.
Circling back to Nick Ward a little bit, I think he's a good player. And if it's just, is Tom Izzo going to give him the minutes to flourish, I think.
Right.
Because he wasn't a heavy fouler last year, but only played like 18 minutes a game, 18 and change a game. And he just needs to see more minutes to really have an all Big Ten kind of impact. Yeah. And I think he's capable of doing that if he gets the minutes. Looking at the box score from IU last year, he caused big problems for the Hoosiers last year. He put up 18 and 13 in that game. And that was the game at Michigan State.
Right. And he's another guy where he poses a little bit of a matchup problem for Indiana because Jerod Davis, like we said, it's not a question of if, but when he gets in foul trouble. The reason I think that he was so successful against Indiana last season was that he was just so much bigger and he was able to just, impose his will down low, and Indiana didn't really have a response. So if they don't have the same size inside to stop him, he could pose similar problems. Anything else before the Big Ten tournament that you feel like is a matchup really worth diving into?
Wisconsin. I think
Ethan Happ could be a potential Big Ten player of the year.
Yeah, he's my pick for Big Ten player of the year. They have Brad Davison, the typical pesky Wisconsin guard.
Classic Wisconsin. That's why they call Wisconsin the Buzzcuts, is people like Brad Davison.
He's a good player. I think he could be an all Big Ten type of player. Maybe probably not first team, but he could land himself on an all Big Ten team. He's ferocious on both ends of the court, which Ethan Happ is such a handful to deal with already that he can have some sneaky good value for the Badgers.
Yeah.
Wisconsin's given Indiana so many problems over in the recent years. I think it's probably for the best for Indiana that they only play in Bloomington. They don't go up to Wisconsin this year. They only play in Bloomington on February 26th, late in the Big Ten season. So by then we'll certainly know who both of these teams are when they're playing. And I think arguably the best matchup that we could see all season for Juwan Morgan is Ethan Happ.
I agree. Ethan Happ is so good. And part of the trouble with him is he's such a smart player and such a good passer and such an instinctive passer that the moment you double team him, if you don't immediately have your help defense in place to take away his kickout passes, he's going to find someone and they will get an open shot more likely than not. So you either have to choose between, okay, are we just going to play single coverage on this guy? And, if he makes it, he makes it and you live with it. A 55% shooter from the field, whatever he was last season. Or do we send a double, which Indiana, like I said, has been prone to do? Do we send a double team and risk kick out threes or risk other guys beating us off the dribble and getting the basket and compromising our defense and getting out of shape that way. So no matter how you play him, he's going to be a matchup problem, and he's going to find ways to hurt your defense.
Yeah. We'll see if Indiana's finally able to beat Wisconsin. It'll be a little, again, they'll have the home court behind them, and it'll be a big late February game, which Assembly Hall, especially when Indiana's a pretty good team, tends to show up for. So we'll see what happens, but that is a tougher matchup for Indiana and a tough stretch for them too.
Yeah.
That might be the toughest stretch of the schedule right in there. From February, they play versus Purdue on February 19th, at Iowa February 22nd. That has the makings of a trap game, and when you hear the next two teams they have, because they have Wisconsin then on February 26th and then Michigan State again at home on March 2nd. So while it's not a tough stretch of the schedule in terms of it just being jam-packed, like you remember last year they had the 7 games in 17 days or something like that. It's not any kind of madness like that, but they have 3 tough teams in there, and the one road game is the type of road game that Indiana could conceivably drop.
Yeah. They follow that stretch up with Illinois and then Big Ten juggernaut Rutgers to close out the season on my birthday, no less. And then the Big Ten tournament. Hopefully, for Indiana's sake, Friday the 15th through March 17th, Sunday. But in a worst-case scenario, that would be the 13th through the 17th. I don't imagine that worst-case scenario will occur, but you never know. You never know.
You never know. You can't predict basketball.
I'll say for my own sake, I do hope they get a top 4 seed because the Big Ten tournament is during spring break. And selfishly, I would rather have 5 days of spring break than 3. So
yeah,
I'll put that out there. You know, if Indiana wants to do me a solid, do its entire student body a solid, give them a longer spring break, help us student media types out, that would be greatly appreciated. I'm not pulling for the home team. I'm just saying it'd be nice if they'd do this for me. So, and
on that note, I think that just about wraps up our schedule overview podcast. Indiana has a pretty tough schedule this year, which could be to their benefit.
Yeah.
A good non-conference schedule.
That's the thing. They always play a soft non-conference schedule. It's good to see some real teams on that.
Yeah, good teams, and the cupcake games are like a little better cupcake, a little more firm.
Montana State, Chicago State, been in the oven a little bit longer.
That's the analogy I was about to go for.
Yeah,
they're not as soft and mushy of cupcakes as they've had in recent years.
Yes.
So that plus, I think what will be an improved Big Ten overall makes for a pretty tough schedule.
You think the Big Ten's improved
from last year? They only had 4 tournament teams last year, and I think there's more than 4 tournament teams in the league this year.
Part of me agrees, but part of me looks at the top end talent that the league lost and thinks that it might have taken a step back. But I don't know because Michigan State, Michigan, Purdue have all lost these guys to the draft and to graduations. I don't know. I don't know how to judge it, but I do think there will be more tournament teams this year. I think the depth is a little bit better, but the top end is not quite as good.
Right. So we'll see. We'll see how it all plays out. But
real quick, since we're running out of time, where does Indiana finish in the Big Ten and who wins the Big Ten?
I picked Indiana to finish second in the Big Ten, and Michigan State is my winner.
I went Michigan, Indiana, Michigan State. So
I have Michigan in third.
I think there's kind of a consensus that those will be the top 3 in whatever order you want to put them in, and it seems like the rest of it is fairly wide open.
That Michigan State game on March 2nd in Bloomington could go a long way towards deciding Big Ten tournament seeds.
Yeah, we talked about those Michigan games, but that Michigan State, third to last game of the year, could have real implications and
for the Big Ten and NCAA tournament.
Yes. We will keep you guys posted on schedule matters, Indiana team matters all season. And until then, we'll talk to y'all next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. To get more from me and from Alex, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana University basketball. If you liked this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member who loves IU basketball as much as you do. You can also support the show by leaving a rating and review on iTunes, which helps us get the word out to more IU fans like yourself. We will be back next week with a new episode. Until then, as always, go Hoosiers.